The Revalan expanse had been empty for centuries. Not in the literal sense. It was brimming with matter, radiation, ancient stellar remnants, and the drifting bones of civilizations long gone, but empty in the way deserts are empty. Harsh, quiet, unclaimed. Fleetmaster Vural Kathesh of the Jar Dominion stood at the curved edge of the Vorshke, the oldest and most decorated capital vessel in their expeditionary fleet. Its hull, grown from bonded crystalline alloy and pulsating synth flesh, gleamed faintly in the red light of the binary suns. Vural was not a sentimental creature, but even he could sense the importance of what they were about to do. "Prepare the fold jump," he said with ritual formality. His command bridge, fluid, pulsing, warm, responded in chorus. Technicians with six-limbed dexterity and hormone-synced minds began synchronizing the jump harmonics. For the Jar, expansion was not conquest, it was inheritance. They believed the stars were always meant to be theirs and that any opposition was simply ignorance to be corrected or weak will to be extinguished. It was a belief that had been embedded into their genomes for millennia. They had charted thousands of systems, burned hundreds, integrated dozens of species who had once called themselves free. In all that time, in all that blood and brilliance, they had not known fear. Not yet. Vural looked to the void with ancient certainty and said the words every Dominion commander uttered before a new region was claimed. No minds, no laws, no flames but ours. And so the fleet jumped. Across the vast arc of the Persean arm, light bent, time jittered, and 12 vessels larger than cities emerged into the Revalan expanse. At first there was nothing. Then came the silence, but not a natural one. No system was truly silent. Cosmic radiation sang soft symphonies through sensor webs. Nebular gases hummed with life potential, and even void-bound relics emitted whispers of entropy. This sector, however, it was still, too still. "Fleet Master," said Jorik, his prime strategist, "we are detecting interference, anomalies in gravitational rhythmics, subtle but present." Vural narrowed his eyes, multi-layered pupils adjusting spectrum. "Artifacts, stellar debris." "Negative," Jorik said slowly. "It almost feels artificial." The idea was offensive. Artificial to a Jar meant primitive. Machines were useful, disposable. Organic intellects interfaced with symbiotic intelligences. They did not build metal boxes and cold systems like the relic races of old. And yet the data did not lie. Then came the first glimpse on the edge of their perception. A shadow cast where no light was blocked. A mass that distorted space not by presence but by indifference to being observed. And then it moved. 3,000 kilometers away, drifting with no emissions, was a vessel unlike anything they had known. A geometric impossibility. Angular, dark, non-reflective, almost invisible except when light reluctantly traced its edges. It did not announce itself. It did not pulse with organic warmth. It did not scan. It simply was. Jorik whispered, "By the seeds it has no bio-signs." Vural stepped forward. "Play back its entry." His staff hesitated. Then the data was shown, compressed, clean, terrifying. The vessel had not arrived. It had been there, always there, hidden in a bubble of gravitational masking more sophisticated than any cloaking technology the Jar had ever known. Its sudden appearance was not movement, it was acknowledgement. They had entered its domain, and it had noticed. "Send no signal," Vural ordered. "Prepare silent analysis, determine composition, purpose, threat rating." But even as he spoke, the vessel rotated, not in aggression but in awareness, like a predator turning a single eye to a new sound. Thousands of kilometers away, aboard the UHS Archangel, Captain Elijah Reyes stared at the screen with the stillness of stone. A former professor of ethics turned fleet commander, Reyes did not believe in war for war's sake. His presence in the Rivalan expanse was not an act of aggression. It was a reminder to those who forgot history. "Contact?" asked Commander Jaimin Thao from the bridge's starboard console. "Nothing yet," Reyes said. "But they are watching." "Orders, sir?" He sipped his coffee, black as the void outside. "Observe, record, let them make the first mistake." On the surface, Archangel was a warship. Underneath, it was a statement. Every line of its brutalist design rejected the aesthetic elegance of alien warcraft. It was not grown or decorated. It was constructed. Forged in the furnaces of forgotten Earth, built in the orbital shipyards of Vesta and Europa, polished by minds who still remembered what it meant to bleed for peace. Archangel had never fired in anger, but she had been built to end wars before they began. As the alien fleet floated, forming a slow semicircle around the Archangel, Reyes reviewed the old histories again. The fall of Solari Prime, the Alvanox betrayal, the Treaty of Four Earth Nations, the decade-long silence that followed. Humanity had not conquered the stars with beauty. They had carved their place with suffering, sacrifice, and a kind of moral stubbornness that refused to yield. Back on the Jar Bridge, Vural gave the order to test. A signal burst. Harmless, broad spectrum. It was met with silence. And then a response. Not in language, in motion. Archangel began to pivot. But unlike any vessel the Jar had ever seen, it moved like an idea made real. Not with thrusters or pressure or gravimetric bending, but with mass realignment, a kind of spatial consensus that ignored inertia. It turned and its form unfolded. Weapons arrays that had been indistinguishable from hull plating clicked into motion. Not loud, not fast, but absolute, like a door closing on fate. Within Archangel's core, the AI known as Bastion, an evolved digital consciousness seeded from the ethics of the UN Charter, the Geneva Conventions, and ancient Buddhist logic circuits, began to run simulations. It did not consider preemptive strikes. It did not measure enemy biology as targets. It simply asked a question. Are they capable of reason? A pause. Then a whisper over open frequencies. A Captain Reyes' voice, calm, articulate, unflinching, echoed across the void. "You have entered human-monitored space. State your intent." The Jar reeled. There had been no encryption, no threat, no pretense. Just truth, naked and immutable. Vural felt, for the first time in his centuries of service, the shame of arrogance. How often had they assumed superiority because others bowed? How often had they silenced reason with fire? Now, standing before a monolith that did not blink, did not roar, did not flinch, he began to understand. Power was not in the ability to destroy. It was in the ability to choose not to. He opened a channel. "This is Fleetmaster Vural Kathesh of the Jar Dominion. We were not expecting resistance." Reyes answered without delay. "We are not resistance, we are memory." Silence again, but this time it was different, not empty, full of reflection. For in that moment, one truth reverberated through the stars. It is not the loudest voice that commands the galaxy. It is the one that speaks with reason while holding the sword and chooses silence instead. The channel closed with a whisper, not a roar. Fleetmaster Vural Kathesh remained still at the helm of his living ship, not because of indecision, but because he understood, perhaps for the first time, that he was no longer in control of the narrative. For over 4 millennia, the Jar Dominion had dictated the shape of history. They had written their story into the stars with biofire and compliance spores. And yet, here in the Rivalan expanse, they were being written into someone else's story. The humans' words were not merely a warning, they were a frame, a structure, an architecture of moral sovereignty. We are not resistance, we are memory. That line settled over the fleet like dust on glass, slowly dimming the reflection of their self-image. On board the UHS Archangel, Captain Reyes did not feel victorious. He felt weary. The kind of weariness born not from battle, but from anticipation of a battle that might never happen, or worse, one that must happen against his will. Every commander dreams of power, but few understand the burden that comes with knowing you can annihilate someone in an instant and still choosing to speak instead. That burden had become a guiding principle in humanity's post-Earth philosophy. Just because we can does not mean we should. Reyes carried that principle like a creed, even when his AI, Bastion, reminded him that pragmatism was often the difference between survival and extinction. "They haven't moved," Jaimin noted from the starboard sensor station. Her voice was calm but tight with the subtle tension that only veteran officers could detect in one another. No signs of energy weapon charges. Their internal biosign patterns are oscillating, though stress maybe. "They are confused," Reyes said almost sadly. "We're not reacting the way they expect. They're a culture of dominance. They came here assuming they'd speak and we would either run or die." "But we didn't," Jaimin replied. "No," Reyes said, "because we remember what it's like to be looked at that way." A low hum passed through the bridge as Bastion adjusted internal temperature controls, a minor comfort gesture for the crew, but one programmed to respond to stress readings, subtle breathing patterns, and unconscious tension indicators. "They're scanning us now," Jaimin continued. "Passive sweeps, deep spectrum analytics. They're trying to understand us without provoking another response." "They are welcome to try," Reyes replied. From within the Archangel's massive internal bays, hundreds of sensor relays, scientific probes, and layered decoy packages thrummed quietly in dormancy. Everything about the ship had been designed not only for combat, but for philosophy. It was, in many ways, a floating declaration of values, and its core value etched into a solid panel near the captain's quarters reads simply, "Power restrained is civilization sustained." Far across the void, Vural sat in silence before the bio-throne. He reached inward through the neural tendrils and summoned the Dominion's Memory Eater, a cognitive AI symbiote designed not for logic but for recalling ancestral strategies. It fed him patterns, encounters, conflicts across the ages. None fit. There was no precedent for this. Every scenario assumed adversaries who wanted something, resources, power, land, pride. But this Archangel wanted nothing from them except truth, and truth was not a language Vural had spoken in centuries. His second-in-command, Sareth Vale, flicked her head crest in frustration. "Fleet Master, the longer we wait, the weaker we appear. We must act, at least test their defenses." Vural looked at her, the weight of history pressing down on him like an invisible star. "And if they are stronger than we are, then we adapt as we always have." "No," he said slowly. "We've never adapted. We've absorbed, crushed, subjugated. We've never had to change who we are, until now." The admission fell like a stone into the minds of his bridge officers. The Dominion was an empire, yes, but one built on a fundamental lie that no one could ever be their equal. That lie had governed their politics, their philosophy, even their biology. and now it was crumbling 1 second of human silence at a time. Back on the Archangel, Bastian spoke, not through the ship's speakers, but directly into Ray's neural link. The AI's voice was not synthetic or cold. It was warm, composed, a tone shaped from thousands of human educators, philosophers, and civil servants across generations. "They are culturally collapsing," Bastian said. "I project a 78% probability that this fleet will not initiate hostilities provided we maintain our current posture. However," Reyes waited. "However," Bastian continued, "cultural collapse often births desperation, and desperation births unpredictability." "Understood," Reyes said aloud. "Maintain all defensive systems, but do not escalate." The crew understood. They were not simply soldiers. They were trained diplomats, historians, and multi-domain thinkers. That had become a standard requirement in the new fleets. Humanity had learned after the Third Terran conflict that knowledge of history was not an academic exercise. It was the foundation of survival. A species that forgets its mistakes repeats them. A species that understands them rewrites the outcome. On the Jar flagship, Vural stood. He walked forward across the living bridge, each step sinking slightly into the flesh-metal surface of the Warship until he reached the thought dispatcher. He stared through the membrane at the Archangel, and for the first time he did not see a threat. He saw a reflection. "Open a channel," he ordered. His officers tensed. A few showed outright alarm, but the command was not revoked. When the connection opened, Captain Reyes appeared once more, framed in the soft, silver-gray light of the Archangel's command center. His face, worn by age and the gravitational pull of memory, was not smiling, but neither was it hostile. "I believe," Vural began, voice careful, "we have misunderstood the nature of your presence here." "You came expecting to take," Reyes said, "and we were already here." "I see that now. Do you?" Vural paused. In his world, admission of error was weakness, but he also knew that to persist in arrogance now would be more than foolish. It would be suicidal. "I see that. You do not fear us, and that perhaps is more dangerous than hatred." Reyes nodded once. "Because fear leads to recklessness, hatred to violence, but confidence forces your enemy to question everything." "Are we enemies, Captain Reyes? We don't decide that alone, but you've made first contact in territory we consider under protection. You've come with a fleet. That tells us something about your intentions. And if we withdraw, then we talk." It was so simple, and yet it shook Vural to his core. For centuries, the Dominion had built fleets for war and tongues for conquest. But the humans had built ships for memory and voices for conversation. Jaimin looked at Reyes. "They are breaking formation." Reyes watched as the Jar vessels began to drift apart, not in aggression, but in consideration. Their combat stance unwound, their weapons retracted, their biosignatures stabilized. "It's beginning," Reyes said quietly. "What is?" "The hardest war of all," he answered. "The one against your own nature." The Archangel did not move, it did not fire, it did not chase. It simply watched. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a civilization can do is wait and let the stars ask the question. Captain Reyes stood alone on the observation deck, his silhouette outlined against the black canvas of space. The Archangel's forward viewport stretched before him like a cathedral window to eternity, and beyond it the Jar fleet hovered, fractured in formation, uncertain in posture. They hadn't retreated, not fully, but they hadn't attacked either. It was the kind of standoff that didn't show up in tactical manuals. because this wasn't about positioning or firepower anymore. It was about ideas, and ideas Reyes knew could burn more deeply than plasma fire. Behind him, the soft hiss of the airlock announced Jaimin's arrival. She didn't speak at first. She stood beside him, observing the same fractured starscape. The silence between them was comfortable. That kind of silence only happened between people who had survived too many things together to bother filling space with noise. "They've started broadcasting," she said eventually. "What kind of message?" "Cultural data streams, fractal format, encrypted in nonlinear syntax, but Bastion's already parsing the linguistic baseline. They are telling us their story." She nodded. "Desperate or honest?" Jaimin considered that. "I think they don't know the difference anymore." Reyes didn't answer immediately. His thoughts drifted back to a lecture hall on Titan Station 2 decades ago, where he had once taught young cadets the philosophy of diplomacy through historical trauma. He remembered the slide. Rome didn't fall in a day, but it collapsed the moment it believed it was untouchable. The Jar reminded him of that, the symmetry of arrogance and decay. "Let Bastion receive the stream," he said, "and open our own, give them Earth's history unedited." Jaimin raised an eyebrow. "Including?" "All of it," Reyes said. "The genocides, the wars, the famines, the treaties, the broken promises, the reconciliations. Give them everything. Let them see how we learned and what it cost us to do so." She hesitated. "That might make us look vulnerable." "Good," Reyes replied. "Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the evidence we chose to evolve." Hours passed, then days, and the transmission continued. It became, in time, a silent exchange of civilizational scars. The Jar sent tales of planetary dominion, of bioengineering triumphs, of subjugated species that had become compliant contributors to their empire. They showed war not as tragedy, but as logic, conflict as nature's highest algorithm. Humanity responded not with superiority, but with memory. Bastion compiled hours of footage, texts, music, images that hurt. A child in the dust of Sarajevo, the mushroom cloud over Hiroshima, a starving polar bear floating alone on a fragment of ice, but also the Berlin Wall falling, two men from rival nations shaking hands on the surface of the moon, a Haitian girl learning to code on a salvaged laptop after a hurricane. Humanity's file was not a record of dominance. It was a confession. And in that confession was a power the Jar had never considered, the ability to change without forgetting. On the flagship Vorshke, Fleetmaster Vural Kathesh watched the feed replay in silence. Around him, his crew said nothing. Even the whispering tendrils of the ship's living systems had gone still, as if the vessel itself understood the gravity of what it was witnessing. He paused the transmission at a particular image. An elderly woman, skin like parchment, holding the hand of a child in a field of tall golden grass. No context, no data, just that moment. It lingered longer than he expected. "Is that what they value?" asked Sareth quietly, standing behind him. "I don't know," Vural replied, "but I think it's what they protect." She said nothing more, but her gaze shifted away from the human image toward the hull sensors, as if expecting war to resume at any moment. "Are we changing, Fleetmaster?" she asked after a long pause. "Not yet," he said, "but we're learning what change might cost." And then the moment shattered, not by a weapon, not by betrayal, but by a signal, new, sharp, unfamiliar. Bastion detected it first. A hard ping burst originating from the far edge of the Rivalan expanse. Not Jar, not human, something else, something old. Jaimin looked up from her console. Captain, we've got a third party entering the theater. Unknown vessel, design not consistent with any contemporary faction. Stealth profile, extreme. Rays stiffened. Is it observing? No, she said slowly. It's moving fast on intercept vector toward the Jar fleet. Put them on alert, hail the incoming, warn the Jar. But there was no time. A dark spear tore through local space-time like a thunderclap, and before any defense could orient, a Jar destroyer erupted into violent, silent flame. The creature, if it was a creature, ripped past at relativistic speeds, leaving only shattered sensor ghosts and disassembled armor behind. It hadn't come to negotiate. It had come to feed. Vural's ship rocked violently as feedback from the destruction reached its core. His crew scrambled, pulling up targeting data, defensive protocols. None of it mattered. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't bound by the logic of either fleet. "Fleet Master," one of his helmsmen cried. "We're under attack. Should we return fire?" "Yes," Vural snapped, "but not at the humans." The Archangel shifted. It did not panic. It realigned, not away but toward the Predator. Jaimin's hands danced across her interface. "Awaiting orders, sir. They're under fire, and this thing, it's not sentient in any way we understand." Reyes narrowed his eyes. "How long since we deployed the Athena protocols?" 4 hours ago. "Then we're cleared." He stepped forward, issuing the command not with violence but with responsibility. "Bring all systems online, deploy Bastion Field, and protect the Jar." There was a pause. Then the bridge lit up. One by one the Archangel shed its passive layers. Cloaking dissipated. Gravitic anchors shifted. The Bastion Field bloomed like a sunrise, enveloping not just the Archangel, but the entire zone between it and the Jar fleet. And from beneath the armor, weapons emerged, not to threaten, to defend. The ancient enemy, whatever it was, met its match in force and will. But more than that, it met something that had no analog in its evolutionary programming, 2 former enemies standing side by side. The first salvo from Archangel did not kill it. That was never the point. The point was to change the narrative, to remind even the darkness this space is not yours. The Predator blinked and recoiled. For the first time in 1,000 years, it fled. The stars went quiet again, but not like before. Now there was breath, tension, reflection. Jaimin exhaled slowly. "They'll have questions." "They should," Reyes said. "We just risked ourselves for a former enemy." "Why?" Reyes stared into the space the Predator had vanished from. "Because history watches everything, and this time we choose to be remembered not for what we could destroy, but for what we saved." Behind him, the Archangel pulsed, calm, bright, ready, and beside them the Jar fleet, once imperial and untouchable, now drifted in silence, not because they were paralyzed, but because they were beginning to understand. In the hours that followed the skirmish, neither fleet moved. The Predator had vanished like a nightmare, retreating with the dawn, leaving behind only fragments, sensor echoes, faint gravitational turbulence, and the silent debris of one obliterated Jar destroyer. But what lingered was more potent than wreckage. It was doubt, not the fear of death, but the deeper fear, the collapse of certainty. Fleetmaster Vural Kathesh had not spoken since the Archangel's intervention. He had stood at the edge of the Vorshke's command membrane and watched as the human vessel extended its Bastion Field over his remaining ships, absorbing what would have been fatal strikes with quiet precision. There had been no demand, no ultimatum, not even a word of acknowledgement. They had shielded the Jar without condition. He did not know how to process that. In the Dominion's long history, there were no examples, none, of an enemy intervening to protect them. The concept was alien to their military doctrines, to their cultural logic. You did not save what you intended to defeat, and yet here they were, alive because of a ship that should have been their executioner. "Fleet Master," Surith Vale said cautiously, "we've completed a review of the engagement logs. The Archangel's field projection enveloped 5 of our vessels. We estimate at least 3 would have been lost had it not done so." Vural did not turn. And the humans, casualties, none. Their systems absorbed the impact with what appears to be minor fluctuations in external armor harmonics. He remained silent. "Orders, sir." He finally looked at her. His eyes were not uncertain, but they were changed. "Open a diplomatic channel." On board the Archangel, the message came through at once. Captain Reyes received it in the center of the main bridge, flanked by Jaimin and Bastion's projected interface. A subtle human form shaped from refracted light, seated like a monk beside the command chair. The voice of Fleetmaster Vural came through clear and deliberate. "This is Vural Kathesh of the Dominion Jar. We request parley. No demands, no performance, just that." Reyes nodded to Jaimin. "Accept." The communications screen flickered. 2 commanders stared at one another, separated by species, culture, and history, yet united now by something neither had predicted: shared survival. "I do not have the words for what you did," Vural began. "Neither did we," Reyes replied. "But we had the choice." "That choice," Vural said, tasting the word like it was foreign. "It was not logical. Strategically, it placed you at risk. You gained no advantage." Reyes tilted his head slightly. "Not every decision is measured by what it earns us. Some are measured by what they allow us to become." Vural considered that, then nodded once. "You are unlike any power we have faced." "We're not a power," Reyes said. "We're a memory of one, and a warning against becoming what we once were." It was not a boast. It was a confession, a quiet testimony to the long trail of history behind humanity, the wars that had defined them, the alliances that had cost them, the losses that had scarred them. "We've studied your culture," Reyes continued. "Not to dominate it, but to understand it, and what we saw wasn't evil, it was arrested." "Arrested?" "You stopped evolving. Technologically, biologically, you advanced, but morally, ethically, you reached a plateau, and you built a civilization on the belief that no one could ever challenge it. Until now." Vural did not answer immediately. Outside the viewport, the Archangel floated still, like a monument, not a warship. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "That depends on what you do with what you've seen." Elsewhere, far beyond the Rivalan expanse, in a vault of space known only to a few, the Council of Perpetuity convened. They had no fixed location, only presence. They were old, not in the way trees were old, but in the way gravity was old. Civilization after civilization had bowed to them or ignored them and perished. They were the watchers, the custodians of galactic balance, or so they believed. They had observed the Archangel's arrival, not just the encounter with the Jar, but the moment it activated its Bastion field. That one act had triggered an alert protocol not used in over 4,000 standard cycles. It was not the weaponry that concerned them, it was the restraint. The holographic figure of Curator Alosthen, a being composed of living liquid memory, addressed the others. "The humans have intervened," he said, "and they did not demand tribute nor recognition. They protected their enemy," replied the crystalline intelligence known as Vayet, a being composed of hypersentient lattice. "That is unprecedented." "It is dangerous," said another voice, cold and rooted in mechanical cadence. Mercy is a destabilizing force. It inspires rebellion. It upsets hierarchies. But it builds new ones, Alothen replied. That may be what they want. A silence passed through the council that no sound could occupy. They must be studied, said Vayet. They have been studied, the cold voice snapped. And now they must be considered a variable of unacceptable magnitude. Then propose a course. We wait. They agreed, but they did not wait passively. Back near the expanse, the Jar fleet slowly began to reorganize, not for war, but for something far more difficult, redefinition. The signals began to change. Ship-to-ship communication now carried code structures requesting archival data, historical analysis, even cultural libraries. One request came directly to the Archangel. Please transmit your planetary charter. We wish to understand your laws. When Jaimin showed Reyes the message, he said nothing for a long while. Then he turned to Bastian. Send it. The full charter, the AI asked. All of it, Earth history, our UN Constitution, the colonial codes, and the Phoenix Accords. Bastian obeyed. In silence, the Archangel became not just a warship, not even just a monument, but a library for every species that had ever carved its dominance into the stars with weapons and banners. Here was a species that had chosen to carve meaning instead. Meaning through memory, memory through truth, and truth through restraint. Surith Vale stood in the archives of the Vorshke, watching the incoming data. Thousands of human documents, images of planetary legislation, declarations of rights, treaties signed between enemies, and at the heart of it all, one sentence repeated through generations, languages, and scars. The strong must carry the burden of mercy, or they are not strong, only feared. For the first time in her life, she wondered which the Jar had truly been. On board the Archangel, Captain Reyes sat alone again on the observation deck. The stars hadn't changed, but maybe something else had. Jaimin joined him, silent for several minutes. Then she asked, "Do you think they'll follow through?" "I don't know," he said, "but I know what happens if we don't try." She leaned back, gazing out into the ever-turning dark. "We've become what we once feared," she said softly, "but in the best way." He looked at her. "No," he said, "we've become what we once needed." 3 weeks passed. The Rivalan expanse had returned to its silent rotation around stars too ancient to care who claimed them. The predator that had emerged and vanished without a name had not returned. The Jar Dominion fleet remained in system, no longer arrayed in offensive formations, but distributed in asymmetric orbitals, part tactical prudence, part symbolic submission. They were not allies, but they were no longer invaders. On the bridge of the UHS Archangel, Captain Elijah Reyes read a message that had been relayed through the diplomatic comms array 12 hours ago. It had come not from the Jar, nor from any recognized political body, but from Earth. The logo of the United Earth High Council flickered on the edge of the holoscreen, sterile and silver. The message was direct. Your intervention in the preservation of a hostile foreign fleet has triggered division within command. A formal review of Archangel's engagement protocol is underway. Some among the assembly argue that your display of restraint has undermined human deterrence credibility. You are requested to return to Arca's orbit for deposition and strategic reassessment. It wasn't a reprimand, not yet. But it was close. Reyes didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked the corridor toward the Archangel's inner garden, a living biosphere grown from Earth flora, not for food or oxygen, but for memory. It had been Jaimin's idea. Every major Earth fleet ship carried one now, a place where officers could remember what they were fighting for, not just against. He found her there, kneeling near a bed of moss. She didn't look up. "They are calling you home," she said. "How long have you known?" Bastion intercepted the signal before it hit our queue. He nodded. "They think we made a mistake." She plucked a dead leaf from a fern and rolled it between her fingers, because we didn't finish what they feared. Reyes sat beside her. It was easier when our enemies wanted nothing but blood. It was easier when our choices didn't reflect back at us. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Some in the assembly think the Jar will see our mercy as weakness. Maybe they will. But if we stop acting like who we want to be, if we stop being the species that chooses restraint, then we're just a better-dressed version of them." She turned toward him. "And if restraint gets us killed?" Reyes met her eyes. "Then we'll die remembered for something worth remembering." Elsewhere in the Archangel, Bastion was compiling and broadcasting a new archive, not to Earth, but to Jar. It was part of what Reyes called the ethical payload, a silent warhead of history, law, tragedy, and triumph, streamed across light years to educate before any bullet was ever loaded. Today's packet included the War of Reunification, where two halves of Earth nearly annihilated each other over territory they no longer remember fighting for, and the Treaty of Borean, where humans negotiated with the Anethi after 30 years of bloodshed, even though they had the upper hand. Embedded in the archive was a message from Reyes himself. "You do not need to become us, but you must understand why we chose not to become you." On the Vorshke, Fleetmaster Vural read those words a dozen times. Then he turned to his junior officers, 3 younger minds from the next generation of Jar tacticians, and asked the unthinkable. What would our civilization be if we taught this in our academies? The youngest among them, a female named Eshel who had grown up reading ancient war epics, said, "We would fracture." "Perhaps," Vural replied, "but we are already fracturing. The only question is what grows from the cracks." A word of the human mercy had spread through Jar space. At first, state media denounced it as manipulation, calling Archangel a weapon disguised as a preacher. But that narrative cracked when the data packets reached the outer colonies, especially the younger generation, those raised not in conquest but in stagnation. For the first time, they saw power wielded without domination. They saw command without cruelty, and they began to question. Underground forums lit up with human quotes. A new slang word emerged in Jar dialect. Rikina, derived from the human restraint, but twisted lovingly to mean the courage to not. The Empire did not know how to respond. Some Jar leaders called for a complete withdrawal from the expanse and isolation from human influence. Others proposed preemptive war, fearing that the Archangel represented not just a ship, but a new kind of virus, one of values. But there were voices, still quiet, that asked the most dangerous question. What if we've been wrong? Back on Earth, the Assembly was not united. In the capital arcologies of New Geneva, debate flared. Admiral Seraphine Calloway, Rey's former superior, stood before the chamber and delivered a speech that would later be echoed in thousands of academic courses. "We built the Archangel not only to fire but to think. We entrusted it with our ethics because we believed some decisions should not be made in anger. If we punish Captain Reyes now, we admit that our values are only for peacetime, that we do not believe in them when they matter most. And if that is the case, then the Archangel is not the only thing returning home in disgrace. We all are." The vote was postponed. but it would not be forever. Back in orbit over Rivalan, a new ship arrived. Not Jar, not human. It bore the markings of the Alethi Concord, a species known for neutrality and memory. Their ships were archivists, not soldiers, but the fact that they had come at all meant something was shifting. They opened a channel. "We have observed your encounter," said the soft-toned being who appeared on the Archangel's main screen. "We have not seen such restraint since the dawning collapse. We wish to learn from you." Captain Reyes said nothing at first, then he nodded. "Then listen well, because we don't offer our story to be praised. We offer it because we never want to repeat it." The Concorde began recording. Later that night, Reyes sat alone in his quarters, not reading, not speaking, just thinking. Bastian's voice entered his mind, gentle as always. "They are watching, all of them. I know, you changed the jar. No, they changed themselves. Just lit the match. Matches can start fires, or warm, cold hands." Bastian paused, then almost humanly, "You're tired." "I've been tired since the war on Cygnus Gate. I just forgot what peace felt like." There was silence, and then, "Do you want to stop?" "No," Reyes said, "but I want to know that one day this job won't exist anymore. That will take time. I'm not asking for now." "Then what are you asking for?" He looked out the window. "For us to be the kind of people who keep trying anyway." Below them, the Jar transmitted their first message of peace. Not a treaty, not a concession, just 6 words. "We are listening, keep speaking, Archangel." A single message. Just 6 words. "We are listening, keep speaking, Archangel." They had arrived like a hammer, now they whispered like students, and that terrified the old powers more than any weapon ever could. Within 6 standard days, 12 other species sent diplomatic probes toward the Rivalan expanse. Some came cautiously, hiding behind cloaking fields and encrypted relays. Others came boldly, emissaries aboard civilian craft, bearing white light markers of non-aggression. Not all came in peace, and none came without agenda, but they came. What brought them wasn't curiosity, it was fear of something new. Because the galaxy had long been built on equations of power. Who had it? Who didn't? Who wielded it? Who bent beneath it? And now here was a ship, not a fleet, not a faction, just one ship that had tilted those equations by doing something no one expected. It chose not to kill. In a universe raised on war, that was more than a deviation. It was heresy, and heresy demands a response. From a starless sector known only in forgotten maps as Corva's Silence, a signal burst across the galactic net. It came encoded in lattice-time compression, a form so old only the oldest AI systems could parse it. The Archangel received it first, of course. Bastian decrypted it instantly. Jaimin stood over Reyes' shoulder as he read it. Her face was pale. "Who are they?" she asked. Reyes' voice was low, almost a whisper. "The Verity Accord." She stared. "I thought they were a myth." "They were supposed to be," Bastian added quietly. "A council of pre-collapse civilizations, ancient species that chose to operate in secrecy after the collapse wars. They don't govern, they balance." Reyes read the message again. It was short, blunt. "Your moral contagion threatens galactic equilibrium. You will cease dissemination of your ideological archives. Immediate compliance is advised." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jaimin said, "They're afraid we're changing the rules." Reyes nodded. "Because we are. They'll come for us." "No," Bastian said. "They're already here." The screens lit up with new data. A vessel, shape unknown, origin untraced, had exited fold space less than 1 away. Its energy signature was anomalous, not because it was powerful, but because it didn't fit into known physics models. Where Archangel was brutalist and engineered, this thing was elegant, monolithic, like a cathedral torn from the void itself. It bore no weapons, none visible, and yet Bastion's threat matrix glowed bright red. "Captain," the AI said, "we are looking at a Class Zero deterrent, a judgment vessel not built to win wars, built to end them." Reyes stood. He didn't issue orders. He simply said, "Open a channel." The screen pulsed, and then a face appeared, or something like a face. It shimmered, refracted, abstract, as if reality itself bent to contain it. When it spoke, it did not speak in words, but in consensus, multiple languages layered into one consciousness, forming meaning across species and thought. "You have been observed." Reyes didn't flinch. "You've been watching long before we arrived. Why reveal yourselves now?" The presence responded, each syllable like a ripple through the mind. "Because now you threaten to become a symbol. Symbols ignite revolution. We maintain equilibrium by containing myth. Your restraint has become myth." Jaimin murmured, "They are afraid people will believe we're better than them." The voice continued, "You will cease, you will depart. If you do not, your memory will be cleansed." It wasn't a threat, it was a decree. Reyes didn't look away. "We're not spreading ideology, we're telling our story. Your story is infection, a plague of hope." Bastion's voice entered Reyes's neural line, private and measured. "Captain, we cannot defeat that ship. Our models show probability of survival at below 4%. Options? None that don't betray who we are." Reyes closed his eyes. 30 years in the service, a dozen wars, thousands of hours negotiating peace in systems no one remembered. He had watched friends die for flags that no longer flew and held children who would grow up never knowing what silence between stars meant. And now he was being asked to silence the one thing humanity had left, its belief in better. He opened his eyes. "No." The screen flickered. "We do not negotiate with echo chambers," the voice replied. "You mistake us," Reyes said. "We're not an echo. We are warning you." "Then let me return the favor." He stood straighter. His voice dropped to its calmest register, the one Bastion had learned was most dangerous in human leaders. "If you fire on us, we won't fire back. We won't scream. We won't plead. We'll just become." The silence that followed was not technical. It was consideration. The Verity Accord did not expect refusal. Certainly not from one ship. Certainly not from one man. And yet they left. No battle. No climax. Just retreat. And in the vacuum they left behind, the message was louder than any explosion. This story cannot be stopped. When news of the encounter reached Earth, the assembly fractured again. Some called for recall, others for escalation. A few, very few, called for faith. On Jar Prime, protests erupted, not against humans, but against silence, against censorship, against fear of becoming more. The Archangel received messages from 12 different species. All asked the same question: "What is the cost of becoming like you?" Reyes replied with a single file, an image, an old woman holding a child in a golden field. The caption read, "Everything and still not enough, but worth it." Bastion archived the moment as the second turning. History would remember it differently, but the stars would remember it. As the day one ship proved that restraint could burn brighter than war. It began with whispers, not in Senate halls or war councils, but in classrooms. A young Jar student in the outer colony of Vatharan uploaded a file to her planetary network. It contained a personal reflection, translated from the human language into Jar harmonic glyphs. The essay was titled, "Mercy is Not Surrender." In it, she described watching the Archangel shield her fleet, how it had chosen defense when it could have chosen conquest, and how that act had shattered everything she was raised to believe about strength. Within 3 planetary rotations, her message had been shared over 30 million times across Jar space. Within 5, she was arrested for ideological contamination. By the 6th, protests erupted on 17 Jar colonies, not coordinated, not planned, but synchronized by something more powerful than politics, possibility. Not long after, similar signals emerged from other species. A minor planetary government within the fractured Arkan cluster passed a local law banning preemptive orbital bombardment. When questioned, their defense minister responded simply, "If one human ship can choose not to kill, so can we." No declaration was made, no formal alliance signed, but across the galactic map lights began to flicker, small, scattered at first, then spreading. They called it the Archangel Network, not a government, not a religion, an understanding. A coalition of planets, research groups, refugees, and minor nations, all willing to abide by a single shared value, the deliberate limitation of power in exchange for dignity. For the first time in galactic history, a movement spread not by sword or coin, but by conscience. And for many in the old powers, that was unacceptable. In the shadow of the black stars, a covert gathering took place. Leaders of 8 ancient empires, including factions from the silent remnants of the Verity Accord, met in secret aboard a hollowed planetoid known as Ephraim's Core. Their consensus was simple. Humanity was dangerous, not because of its weapons, because of its ideas, because they had chosen to show restraint and the galaxy had noticed, because they were not trying to rule and yet others were willing to follow, because they had made a single ship more feared than entire armadas by daring to say no to war. And so they planned, not for invasion, for erasure. Back aboard the Archangel, Bastion ran simulations. Thousands, then millions. The results were always the same. "Captain," the AI said, "the convergence is accelerating. Multiple powers are now preparing coordinated action to eliminate us not directly but structurally. Sabotage, disinformation, proxy destabilization. They're not coming with guns," Jaimin added. "They're coming to tear us apart from the inside, to fracture the idea." Reyes didn't speak. He stood in the forward chamber, staring at a wall, not a digital one, a real one. Etched into it were the names of every fallen member of the Exploration and Peacekeeper Corps, going back 147 years. The wall had been updated after each conflict, after every sacrifice. It was the only part of the Archangel that was never digitized. "They think we're a myth," Reyes finally said. "So now they'll try to prove we were a lie." "They want us to respond in anger," Bastion noted. "To break character, or they want to reveal the human beneath the symbol." Jaimin stepped forward. "What if they are right?" Reyes turned. "What if we're not ready to lead?" she continued. "What if we just got here first?" The silence was not hostile, it was honest, and in it Reyes did not defend humanity. He didn't summon history or invoke old Earth tragedies. He simply said, "Then we lead by listening." That same day, an encrypted signal arrived from Jar space. It was from Eshel, the arrested student. She had escaped. How, she wouldn't say, but her voice trembled with something few Jar ever used, hope. "Fleetmaster Vural is gone, silenced, but not forgotten. There are others, underground, military officers, teachers. He planted something, it's growing." Reyes sent no reply, but in the crew quarters, in the science bays, in the communication hubs of the Archangel, every officer, every cadet, Every technician felt it. The tide was turning. And still, they were alone. Then came the call, from Earth, but not the Council, from the public. In the largest planetary address since the founding of the Unified Nations, civilians, educators, artists, veterans, and philosophers uploaded a joint message, not drafted by diplomats, but by people who had seen war, who had raised families in a world once broken by it. The message was sent to the galaxy in all major languages. We are not perfect, but we remember. We will not ask you to worship us. We only ask that you walk beside us. It was not broadcast from a fortress. It came from children reading in schools, from the dying in hospitals who had lived through old wars, from poets. And when the old powers saw this, they knew the mistake they had made. They had tried to break a ship, but the ship was only a mirror, and what it reflected could no longer be unseen. In the final hours of that cycle, the Verity Accord broadcast one final signal. We warned you. And they vanished, but this time not into the shadows, into silence. A silence that spread not like fear, but like yield. In the deepest part of the Archangel, where no lights reached and no weapons could fit, Captain Reyes stood beneath a small tree growing in the bio-sanctum. It was a ginkgo, one of Earth's oldest species, a tree that had outlived empires, nukes, and extinctions. Jaimin joined him. They are still watching, she said. I know. Some still hate us. I know, and we're still alone. Reyes looked up at the leaves. Not alone, he said. He touched the bark of the tree. We just haven't met everyone who remembers yet. The message had no title. It arrived in every known frequency across every galactic sector. Not as a command, not as a threat, but as a question. Captain Elijah Reyes recorded it in silence, seated at the heart of the Archangel, alone except for Bastion's faint presence and the low hum of the ship breathing around him. The lighting was dim, the stars outside unmoving, a moment designed not for spectacle but for honesty. His voice was clear, weathered by service, grounded in conviction. To those who have watched us, feared us, fought us, we are not the future. We are not the center of the galaxy. We are not without fault, without scars, without blood on our hands. But we remember what it means to fall, to burn worlds for pride, to kill for lines on a map. And we remember what it took to rise again, not by being stronger, but by being willing to change. We offer nothing you cannot already claim. We don't ask you to kneel. We ask you to choose, not for us, for yourselves. What kind of galaxy do you want to wake up in tomorrow? One built on silence, fear, and domination, or one where memory becomes more than warning, it becomes compass? There was no signature, just a transmission ID, UHS Archangel, and then nothing. The Archangel powered down its bastion field, it retracted its weapons, and it waited, on the edge of known space. No fleets moved, no factions responded, not at first, but something had shifted. The stars felt, different, not in light, but in weight, in what they witnessed. On Jar Prime, the young were the first to answer. Art appeared in city walls, depictions of the Archangel not as a warship, but as a scale balanced between destruction and mercy. New poems emerged in forbidden forums, titles like The Ship That Did Not Strike and Steal That Remembered Flesh. In the Arkan cluster, a vote was passed to dismantle all orbit-to-surface mass drivers. Not because of human pressure, but because they no longer believed in what those weapons said about them. Even on worlds still ruled by fear, children played with toys shaped like human dreadnoughts, but not to pretend they were firing. They pretended they were shielding. The Verity Accord never returned. The Jar Dominion was no longer a dominion. Its oldest fleet dissolved into academic service. Former commanders became teachers. Former prisons became archives. And Earth did not claim credit because it had never been about Earth. It had been about choice. And now the galaxy had one. The Archangel did not become a capital. It became a pilgrimage site. Scholars came to stand in its observation halls. Diplomats came to walk its quiet decks. Soldiers came to see a warship that chose not to fire, and always they stood before the tree in the bio-sanctum. The Jinko, a symbol of endurance, of growth, of ancient patience. Captain Reyes remained aboard even as offers came for politics, command, and councils. He refused all because this was never about power. It was about remembrance. In the final days of his service, Bastian asked him one last question. "Do you think they understand now?" Reyes, older now, slower, leaned against the railing and watched the stars drift. "No," he said, "but they are trying, and that was enough." Jimin retired to Earth. She taught diplomacy in the Arctic Learning Dome under skies untouched by light pollution. Every year, her students began their curriculum with a phrase etched in the wall behind her. "The strong must carry the burden of mercy, or they are not strong, only feared." The Archangel remains where it was first seen in the Rivalan expanse. Silent, still, unarmed, but never unremembered. It is no longer just a ship. It is a promise that one day someone must choose not to strike, and when they do, they will not be alone, not anymore.